It's so rare in life that there's like this one cheap instrument that's gonna solve all these problems. And this is literally one of those situations, so just take advantage of that. Hi, my name is Sophie, and I work here at the Pasadena location of the Standard Design Group Nurseries. And today we're going to be talking about Monsteras. So Monsteras are native to the hot rainforests, the really tropical climates of Central America. They love high humidity. They climb up the trees of these rainforests to get light. And that is also why they have these holes in their leaves, so that light can filter through the big leaves and still shine on the leaves below them, because they climb up these trees with their aerial roots. So with watering, it's easy to assume that a tropical plant native to a rainforest is going to want a lot of water. Rainforest, rain, water, drown that plant, right? No. Don't do that. Monsteras really like drying out in between waterings, and then when you do water them, to saturate them a lot. So with my Monsteras, I pretty much let them dry out completely. Like if I use a moisture meter and I fit in all the way to the bottom of the soil in the pot, I pretty much wait until even at the very bottom of the pot it says dry, like bone dry. And then I will soak that Monstera all the way through, make sure it's like pouring out of the drainage holes. Maybe you don't have to go that crazy, but as a general rule, these tropical plants do like being watered very as infrequently as possible, but then with each watering to saturate it completely. I am such a big proponent of moisture meters just because it's one like maybe $10, $20 instrument, and it's gonna help you get rid of all of the doubt of when to water any of your houseplants, because you can use one moisture meter for all of your houseplants, and you don't have to go digging through the soil with your fingers and get your hands all dirty to feel how wet the soil is. And you also want to know if the bottom of the soil in the pot is wet, because the top could look really dry, but then maybe in the middle, the soil is really wet and it's actually like soggy and starting to rot. I love a moisture meter. I think everybody should have one. It's so rare in life that there's like this one cheap instrument that's gonna solve all these problems. And this is literally one of those situations, so just take advantage of that. Typically, you could probably say water your indoor Monstera like once every 2 weeks, but there's so many different factors. How warm is it in your house? How much light is it getting? Because that is going to affect how quickly it dries out. What is the soil like? Is it really well aerated? Is it going to help the Monstera dry out quickly, or is it just going to retain that moisture? Which, by the way, you do want a really well aerated soil for any kind of tropical plant. One that has a lot of like those white volcanic rocks, perlite or pumice. Maybe put some orchid bark in there. You want something that is loose, not something that's going to clump together, because that's also not going to let much water get into the root ball, and it's also not going to let much oxygen pass through the roots, which is a requirement. Roots also need to breathe. Honestly, I hate plant schedules because even throughout the seasons, it's going to change, you know? They're not going to grow as fast in the winter, even inside, because even a couple degrees of difference, even if you do have a pretty climate-controlled home, even a couple degrees of difference, the shorter days, it is going to make their growth a lot slower during the winter months, if not stopping the growth altogether. That doesn't mean it's dying, unless it's dying for another reason. Strict schedules like that, personally, I just don't feel like they really work, and I don't use them. They're actually a pretty easy, low maintenance plant as long as you're really allowing all of the soil to dry out in between each watering. If you're not letting that happen, then the roots are very prone to developing rot, and then once that sets in really badly, the whole plant is probably going to die. So you're better off neglecting it a little bit longer and letting it dry out a little bit longer and risking it that way than the other way around, where you're watering it a little sooner than you think you have to. Monsteras don't like direct sunlight. If you think about, you know, the tropical rainforests, they start growing on the floor of the rainforest, and that's not a bright spot at all, just because of the canopy of trees overhanging. But they want the bright indirect light and that high humidity because of where they're native to. And like I mentioned before, the reason why they have these holes in the leaves is so that even when they climb up the trees with their aerial roots, they can still let some of the light pass through and reach their lower leaves. They can tolerate a little bit of sunlight, but they really kind of have to build up to that. And so, you know, if you have your Monstera plant in a shady location in your house and then you suddenly put it in a spot where it's getting direct sunlight, especially if you just move it outside out of nowhere, it is gonna scorch the leaves and it might not survive. Unless you live in the tropical areas of the world by the equator where there's really high humidity and it never really gets colder than like 60, 50 degrees outside, I would keep them inside, especially with a smaller plant like this. Here in the California area and the Los Angeles area, I do see Monsteras outside sometimes. To be honest, they never look that happy, or I personally haven't seen ones outside that look exceptionally happy, but ones that are this big, maybe if you have a really shady spot in your yard and your yard is kind of enclosed with hedges or a wall, and so it's a little bit more protected from the wind and the elements, that could work really well. If you get a really mature one that's just a little tougher. Humidity is a Monstera's favorite thing. So obviously the tropic areas, the rainforest, it's extremely high humidity. And to be honest, I would say the one element that kind of differentiates a Monstera that's just growing at a normal, maybe slower pace, and one that's like thriving and really putting out big, healthy leaves at a very fast pace is the humidity. So if you have a humidifier, I have like 3 humidifiers in my house and my Monsteras love it. So yeah, it's gonna help their growth a lot. These ones behind me are somewhere between like 15 and 20 years old. They're almost my age. This is not gonna become this for a very long time, but eventually it will get there. Although keep in mind, this is the large form Monstera, so these leaves do get a little bit bigger and tend to have a little bit more rows of the holes than these leaves. This is the small form Monstera. It still does get a lot bigger and it still does get these fenestrations, the holes, but they just, on average, they won't get as big as these massive leaves up here. So Monsteras are climbers. They use those like long dangly roots in their natural habitat. They use those to kind of cling onto the trees of the rainforest and reach the light, because at the floor of the rainforest is really shady and they do like the indirect light, but they do still need some light. It's definitely recommended to put some kind of support beam on there. If you want to have your Monstera kind of dangle down, it will do that if there's not any kind of support and the leaves won't get as big. So in terms of height, they will really just keep going. If you plant them outside, their roots will really have kind of unlimited space to keep growing. Obviously, these are already pretty massive. They're about twice my height. I'm like 5'5". You know, having these inside would be pretty wild unless you live in a giant villa. You can always prune Monsteras. They actually respond really well to pruning. Or if you want to keep them in the pot that they are currently in, even if the roots are expanding past that point, that will kind of help to stunt their growth. If you look at this Monstera, like the first leaves that are going to grow, like when you're starting a plant from seed, for example, they're not going to have any holes on them. It's just going to look like a little heart, which is kind of looks like any other kind of philodendron leaf, even though this isn't a philodendron, but they have very similar care requirements. And if you see there's one, so this was the first leaf probably, this was the second leaf, it's a little bigger, this was the third leaf, and then boom, the fourth leaf has a fenestration in it, that hole. And then the next one, it already sizes up, or it already has a lot more. And so really you can get the fenestrations within, you know, a few weeks or months from when you start growing the plant. And that's assuming you're not already getting a plant that has been growing for probably around a year. There are certain elements that you're going to want to make sure your plant is getting in order to get the fenestrations, because it is a marker of health and maturity. So you're going to want to give it adequate indirect bright light. You're going to want to give it enough nutrients, a gentle, like well-balanced fertilizer is recommended, and watering it correctly. So again, allowing it to dry out, but then when it is dry, really saturating all the soil so that you're allowing all the roots to drink the water that they need. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope this was a really useful video for learning how to take care of your Monstera. If you have any questions, leave a comment below, and don't forget to subscribe and like this video.